Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to the Long Distance Work-Life Podcast, the show where we aim to help you work, thrive, survive, get through, keep the weasels at bay in the constantly changing world of remote and hybrid work. My name is Wayne Turmel. Marissa is not with us today, which means that we are joined by a very, very smart person who's going to talk to us about some factor of their business. And I am particularly happy today to welcome, here she comes, Jeanna Barrett, who is the founder and chief remote officer of a company called First Paid Strategy. All her information will be on the show notes, as you would expect. Jeanna, how are you?
I'm great, Wayne. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being had. What should people know about you and First Page before we jump into where we're going here?
So I started First Page 8 years ago, 2016, before the pandemic, because I wanted to travel and work remote and build a company that fit how I wanted to work. And I wasn't finding those companies anymore when I was living in San Francisco. So I left. I've been building this growth marketing agency for the last 8 years. We are fully distributed. We've had 30 to 40 teammates across the globe. And we're constantly perfecting being a remote first company.
And I know you walk it like you talk it because you are in Yucatan today.
Yeah.
And yet you live on a little island in Honduras.
Yes.
And I am insanely jealous.
Yeah, I actually started my company right when I left San Francisco. I moved to Belize. I lived in Ambergris Key, an island in Belize, for 6 years. And then the last 2 years, I relocated to Roatan, Honduras, which is another Caribbean island on the west coast of the Caribbean. And I often travel. I mean, I've shared with people that I've worked remote from a sailboat, from an RV, from a golf cart. Like, we drove golf carts on Ambergris Key. So I definitely walk the walk and am a big proponent of like how you do remote work right.
Well, that's what I want to talk about, because as we talked about before the camera started rolling, I mean, companies have to thrive and they have to work, and people have to make money in order to be employed. But what I'm really fascinated by is you started creating your company intending to be fully remote pre-pandemic. And I'm curious as to, let's start with what you knew had to happen and what you set up, right, in order for that to start.
So the biggest thing that for companies that don't have offices is you still have to have an office, and that is your tech stack. So how people come together, how people communicate, how you get jobs done, all happen now in technology instead of in an office. So it was really important for us to really choose the right tech stack. You want to have all the right tools, not too many tools. And that was also like an interesting experience for me as a founder, because it's not so easy as just like setting up these remote tools. It now has become full-time job. You have to have an operations person running these tools to keep up with renewals and access and training. And it's basically, it's not the price of an office, but it does require some investment to make sure that you're getting your tech stack right as a remote company.
Yeah. And so what did you need, like, in your head? Okay, you need email, and you got to have some kind of chat function and some kind of web meeting function. Like, how did you go about? Let's start with what you started with, and then we'll figure out where you are now, right?
Yeah. Actually, the most important thing is a project management platform. So we actually believe that like email is dead. In some ways, like not in a marketing way. People still read their emails, but in terms of collaborating, email is not a good tool for that. There's siloed conversations. You can't find anything. They live and die only in the inbox that whoever was copied on the email, people forget to copy people on the email. So a lot of companies now are working in these massive project management tools. Ours is ClickUp. We first started out in Asana. There's Asana, ClickUp, Monday kind of teams tend to be the three that most companies are deciding between. And that we implemented that, I believe, in year 2 or 3, and that really transformed our business, because that is like one place where every conversation can be searched and seen. There's transparency across all projects and people. You can search for conversations no matter who you are. It really like breaks down silos and barriers, which is what you need in remote work, right? So it really in any work. You don't have to be remote to need to get rid of barriers, but yeah, so project management platform, access and like collaboration is the big key pillars to remote work, right? So you got to make sure everybody has access in a versioning control place. So like Google Docs is usually what everybody uses, Google Drive, making sure you have shared drives. Everybody can open and access them at the right time. You can see different versions. There's not like old school versions of an old Excel that someone emailed each other. And then chat functions, Slack is like the best in class choice at this point. And then, yeah, Zoom. So that's a lot of our core tech stack right there. But then there's a lot. There's probably 5 to 10 more tools that we have that are important as well. But those are the core ones.
Where did you bump your nose when you're starting? I mean, you always start with assumptions about this is what this is going to look like and this is how it's going to work. And then, it's everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right?
Right, exactly. Well, the tech stack has been like a stumble, right? It's taken us a long time to perfect it in terms of like what I didn't realize, because I've always been tech savvy. I've been someone that just loves technology. I buy everything that comes out. I was a native, working in tech scene in my early 20s in Seattle and San Francisco. So what I didn't realize is like how complicated this way of working actually is. And we hire people that have wonderful resumes, but they come into our company and they just struggle with the tech stack. They're not comfortable. They don't, they're not comfortable figuring it out on their own. They're overwhelmed by it. They push it away. And those people ultimately are not going to be successful at our company. So it requires a lot of tech savviness to work async and remote first. And you have to really be willing to be an expert in these tools. You have to have someone within your company that's an expert at these tools. And so that was one stumble.
Let me ask you a question about that before you go any further, because as somebody who knows technology but doesn't particularly love it, my problem is less which button do I push and why should I bother? So when people are coming in and they don't have your tech background, is it just they don't know which button to push, or is it a mindset that you need to either inculcate or hire for?
It's both. It requires you to like take ownership in terms of how are you training your team. If you're a manager or a founder, like what are the tool sets and how are you setting people up for success? So that's a lot of stuff we didn't have in place at first, because I kind of just always had figured things out on my own. So I didn't realize that we needed to have really in-depth like video training and modules and stuff for our tech stack. That can close some gaps. But ultimately, like if you didn't hire the right person that's going to be comfortable really digging in, we've had people that have avoided it. They're really uncomfortable. These tools can be super complicated. And then second to that, how you specifically work in these tools is very prescribed. Like how you tag each other, exactly what you do when a task is overdue, like how you figure out what your start date and end dates are. Like there's an ecosystem to it. And so if you're not willing to teach yourself something new, then you're not going to succeed no matter how many trainings we give you, right? So it's also how do we hire the right people? So we've spent a lot of time figuring out like what are the right questions or project tests, or what are we doing to really get to the crux of like if people are able to figure out a new complex technology, if they're comfortable,
And right now, ears perked up just all over the podverse. So talk to us about what some of those tests are, like just nuts and bolts. What are how would you test for that?
Yeah, we actually have we have core values at our company. And one of our core values is being tech savvy and remote first. So we've just started to just put in place like questions, like prescribed questions of what we're asking people about our core values to get to the crux of if they're going to fit in our core values. So we do have a set of questions that we ask, and every candidate is going to get them in the hiring round, and the tech savvy questions are part of that. We haven't implemented this yet, but I'm just now in the middle of conversations of taking it one step further. We do a project round because we're remote. We want to see how people work. We also want to see how you present. We want to see how you show up to a video call. So we do a project test round. We pay people for this, but we ask people to put together strategies and all that. And we're now talking about, well, how do we take this one step further and like have them do a test that is going to also figure out if they can work within ClickUp. And working within ClickUp requires you to be your own project manager. We do not hire project managers. You need to know how to scope your entire project from start to finish, all the steps. You need to put those steps in ClickUp. And so we're starting to think about how we build a test for our candidates there, because that's where we see people like fail the most, really, is understanding ClickUp.
You said something a minute ago that I don't want to let go by. And that is this notion of people needing to kind of take ownership of their own tech stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that I have gotten lost in the weeds. I tend to do that.
Right.
And where I get lost in the weeds in particular is not which button do I push, it's how do I name files, remembering to tag things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Because I just cause chaos. I don't intend to. I mean well, but I am a chaos agent when it comes to things like, and I know it's gumming up the works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how do you prescribe and kind of manage the tagging and the language and the internal logic?
Yeah. So that's exactly what I'm talking about in terms of like, it is the wild, wild west and can be very chaotic, and actually the antithesis of productivity and efficiency if everybody's working within these tools in whatever way they think is best for them. Because you need everybody working together all in the same way for it really to be efficient and not slow people down. And so ourselves and some other companies I've talked to have taken the approach of like documentation really is like a simple step, and it's a big thing in for remote teams as well. But just having this is how we work document, and very specific communication guidelines and guidelines for how and what you do everything in a tech stack, and have that be in a central location that people can always go back to. So we have a documentation center. You might think of it as like the old school employee handbook that might have been paper, like binder that you got when you got hired forever ago. But now it's like all remote documentation in a place that we do it inside of ClickUp. A lot of teams use Notion. It's a very popular tool right now where you can search any topic and you can find the document that you needed. And so we just spend a lot of time making sure that all of our processes, all of our communication guidelines and everything is like documented in one place for anybody to access at any time to kind of go back and figure out. If you were at our company, Wayne, you would need to go back and figure out how you're supposed to be tagging things, like what's the guideline that we've set. But like setting those guidelines is the first step, and thinking through like all those specific guidelines as a company.
Obviously, and you've mentioned async a couple of times, like it's just, well, yeah, of course, duh. But there are a lot of organizations and a lot of people who have fled those organizations, but we live the way we were raised, right?
Yeah, right.
What is the key to weaning people off of everything needs to be a meeting and still meeting their need for access and contact and that kind of stuff?
So this is the biggest problem going on in remote work right now. And I think this is why companies are failing and saying like, remote work isn't working. It's like, well, you can't just take everybody working in your office and stick them at home and then expect that emailing everybody all day and getting on Zoom for 8 hours a day is what remote work is. That's truly not like remote first operations. And remote first operations is really thinking about how do you peel back meetings from your calendar? Like I myself have had moments in my business where I was doing 6 or 7 Zooms a day. It absolutely makes you feel like your brain is melted. I was so exhausted. It's just a terrible experience, right? So like we put in a lot of guidelines about how and when to use Zoom calls and not to use Zoom calls. When to put, like, we have to put video at the end of every call that's going to be a video. Otherwise, you don't need to show up on video, because defaulting to video can be really exhausting for people too. So we have like 3 Zooms maximum a day. We have no meeting Fridays. We're constantly, probably every quarter, looking at our meeting calendar and talking about like what can be reduced, what can be async. We think a lot about like team meetings, regular meetings. How do we run those async? How do we do part of that? Like we do bi-weekly sync meetings and async meetings. So every other week you'll meet with your manager, but then the other week that you're not meeting with the manager, you do an async update and ClickUp, kind of saying what
Okay,
your
so
blockers
let
are.
me
Yeah.
put a thing in that, because async
I'm rambling.
meeting is, kind of freaks
Yeah.
people out. What I'm
Right.
hearing is, okay, every week we need to check in and see what you're doing.
Mhm.
But if we do a Zoom call, whatever, this week,
Yeah.
next week, a clear, honest report will suffice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do want to say, like, I think we need to all kind of get rid of this feeling need of babysitting, right? Like remote work does come with a lot of trust that we're all adults and we're going to do our work. And if you flip the switch to looking at like what the deliverables are, like if you're doing your work, and getting the deliverables done, like why does it matter how, where, when you're doing your work? So that's one thing. So it's less about like, needing to check in as a manager, but we think of one-on-ones more like as a person. That's your access to your team lead. If you need support, there's something you're blocked on. And yeah, you don't need to meet every week on those things. Like there's other ways to get a hold of each other. We put everything in ClickUp, so I still read it. And the beauty of this, right? And this is where, like, if you're an operations or business founder, but I don't know, not many, if this matters to many on the call, but if I read the async meeting and respond, and they read it and respond, and we solve something, that usually takes 10, 15 minutes. Now, a meeting on your calendar is going to be 50 minutes, right? 2 people, 50 minutes of their time. Like that's a lot of wasted time. And so there's a lot of conversation around like productivity and remote work, but if you're working async, there's more time for you to spend actually doing your work, right? Like we call it deep work, where you're uninterrupted because you're not on a call, or you're not, people aren't talking to you. So you have more time and you're more efficient and more productive when you have more deep work, right? And like you can just get a meeting done in 15 minutes over a chat. It's kind of a situation. Or you can send video clips, right? Like I'm going to send you a 5-minute video clip and we don't need to sit on a phone and talk for 50, 60 minutes about something. So yeah.
That's great stuff. Just because we are, as I knew we would, running out of time.
Yeah.
So much to talk about. What is the one async best practice that you have learned along the way that you kind of didn't know going in?
Yeah, it's really relearning your work habits, and it takes a long time, and I'm guilty of it too, but you can't default to just sending people Slack chats all day, because that's a sync tool, right? You can't default to setting up a meeting because that's a sync tool. So you have to constantly like be working with yourself to always default to your async tool, which is like a project management platform. So I need somebody to do something, put it in ClickUp. I need to ask somebody something, put it in ClickUp. Don't set up a meeting. Don't go on Slack and chat them. So it's just like reworking what your habits are, basically.
That's great. That's really, really good stuff. Thank you so much, Jeanna Barrett. We will have links to all your good stuff on thelongdistanceworklife.com on the page. Those of you who listen to podcasts, you know the drill: like, subscribe, smash that button, whatever you're supposed to say in these circumstances. You can reach out to Marissa and I at any time. We are available by email. We're available by LinkedIn. Comments, questions, vicious personal attacks, anything that you would like to share with us, topics, cool people like Jeanna that we want to talk to. And if you are interested in rethinking how your team comes together, Kevin and my new book, The Long Distance Team, Designing Your Team for Everyone's Success, is out in the world. You can find that and some special resources at longdistanceteambook.com. Jeanna, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate you taking your time. And for the rest of you, thanks for listening. Come visit again. And don't let the weasels get you down.